In this video, we're going to learn how to include an image on our web page. So let's start by getting an image. Now, where are you going to get your image? Well, you can take an image from your computer's built-in webcam. You can take a picture with your cell phone. You can take a picture with a portable camera and then download that to your computer using any method you can. Sometimes it's easy from a phone to maybe email it to yourself. If you're on a Apple, you might do a AirDrop if you know how to do AirDrop. If you have a picture on the internet somewhere, you can go out and maybe it's on your Facebook page. You can pull the picture up and right click on it and click Save As and save it to your computer. But the important thing you got to remember is that you need to save the picture. At least for now, we're going to save it in the same folder where we saved our index file, this web page that we're editing. Okay, so if you remember, that was on our desktop. I created a web folder. Our index page is in there, and I've copied in here a small picture. And look, notice when I highlight over it, it tells me some important information. It tells me the dimensions are 300 by 300, and that's important. You do want to size your pictures. So that's a graphics editing issue. Most of you know how to use one probably. If not, we'll go over that in a different video or during class. If I right click on my image and say properties and go to details, it tells me the dimensions there as well. This is a 300 by 300 pixels by 300 pixels picture, and that's going to come in to be important in a minute. Okay, but the important thing is to make it in the same folder as your web page. Okay, so how do we actually get it to show up on our web page? Now that it's in the same folder, how do we get it to show up? Well, I'm going to insert some code here. And you can type that in your browser. If you need to pause the video, of course, pause it. But I'm going to go through each of these things. Now, this is a little bit different tag than you've seen before. This is a self-closing tag. So remember before we had H1 and it had a closing H1. We had an H2 and a closing H2. A paragraph, it had a closing paragraph. Okay. Emphasis tags, which had a closing emphasis tags. Well, an image closes itself, meaning here we open the tag and the tag is technically IMG. And then the closing is right inside before the greater than sign. We use a slash to close the tag. Okay, so there's not two whole separate tags. It's a self-closing tag. Space at the end, followed by a slash right before the greater than sign. So it's an image tag, but notice there's also some things inside the image tag. There's also these things, they're called attributes, and they help us describe the image that we're going to use. Okay. Well, the first thing it needs to know is what's the name of the file that is supposed to be loaded into this image spot. And if you look back over here, mine was profile_sm for small.jpg. So I want to type the name of the file, and it's got to be spelled the same way. Good form for web stuff is do everything lowercase. So your file names, make them all lowercase. Don't use spaces in them, use underscores. So if you need to rename your file, you might want to do that. Profile _sm dot JPEG. Okay. Then there's this thing that says alternate text. Well, what is that? That is text that describes your picture. Where does that get used? Well, if something happens and this picture doesn't load correctly, you're going to see a box there that's blank, but it will use that alternate text on the box to tell people what it's supposed to be. Okay. The other place that it's used, and this is very important, is that we have to design web pages for people who have disabilities. Okay, so there's a lot of people who use the web who cannot see. So they use something called a screen reader that actually reads what's on a page to them. Well, what happens when it gets to a picture? Okay, they can't see the picture. Their screen reader actually looks at the alternate text and would read out to them, hey, this is Mr. Geiger's picture. Okay. And then I told you it's important to know how big your image was. And ours was 300 wide by 300. Now, if you're following along doing this with me, as you should be, your image will be a different size. Again, we'll talk about resizing our images later. But that's it for the tag. Okay. Open image, source equals, alternate text equals, width equals, height equals. Okay. Now I want to point something out. I'm going to go ahead and save this so you can see it. So Control S. Now come over here and refresh, and there's my picture. Okay. It's not really a picture of me. It's an, I don't know what you call it. Generated on the internet somewhere. But you recognize that as the picture off my, I think it's on my lesson plan page or somewhere. If I made a mistake, maybe I left the S off when I hit refresh. Notice it's got a broken link there, broken picture, but it still says Mr. Geiger's picture, so people will know what is expected to be there. That came from the alt tag. Okay, so make sure you spell your file names correctly. Okay, that's a common mistake that people make when they try to put an image on their web page. The other mistake they often do is they don't use the correct values for width and height. So I'm going to change my width to 150, leave my height at 300, I'll save it and refresh it. And there, I just went on a diet. Okay. It distorted my picture. So your width and height really do need to match the dimensions of your image. Now, my height and width were equal on this picture. What if I made them both 150? Control S. Okay. And that worked. I made my picture smaller, and it didn't distort it because I kept the same proportions. However, this is not good practice because the image is still 300 by 300, and somebody on a slow connection still has to load the 300 by 300 picture. Okay. If we only want it to be 150 by 150, we should use an image editor of some kind to edit the dimensions of the picture down to 150 by 150, because we don't want people on slow connections to have to load extra big pictures. You know, what if it was 1500 by 1500? I can use this to scale it down, but somebody still has to load it. Okay, so it's better to edit your images to the size you want them to be than to rely on the width and height to scale them for you. Okay, so that's bad practice. If you want them to be smaller, go out to an image editor of some kind and save them as a smaller version, and then put the actual dimensions of the image in the width and height. The other way that helps is when your page is first loading. Okay, it takes longer to load an image, especially if it's a big high resolution image or something, than it does to load all this text. So what happens if you don't specify the height? Because technically, I mean, you can leave it out and it would probably work. When that happens, your browser isn't going to leave any space for it. When your picture finally loads, it's going to go ahead and insert the image, and it's going to move the rest of your page down. If you've ever been to a web page, and it's usually ads that do this, and it drives me nuts. You go to a page and you're just starting to read that first paragraph, then all of a sudden it jumps down because some image or some advertisement loaded above it. And every time you scroll down to try and read it, another image or advertisement jumps in above it and causes it to scroll down. If those spaces would have been reserved with a width and a height, it would have loaded the page, left space for those images to come in, and wouldn't be a jumpy experience for the user. So it's important to include all these attributes at the minimum. when you put a picture in your page. I was just thinking of something else we could add. If you want to, you could also put title. Title equals Mr. G. Okay, that's another attribute that you can use. You don't have to use it. You should always use an alt tag. You have to have a source, and you should always use width and height. You don't have to put title, but you can put title. And if you do put title, now you can see when I hover my mouse over my image, whatever the title is, it pops up a little tooltip, called the tooltip, and it says Mr. G. As soon as I stop my mouse moving, it gives me that title of that image. Okay, so you can make that whatever you want. A lot of times you'll see people who the alt and the title will match. They'll both be the same thing. Mr. Geiger's picture will make the title the same thing. Control S to save it. Come over here to refresh. And now it says Mr. Geiger's picture. All right, I will see you in the next video.